Let me see what can we do. Right. So most of it is images. So whatever text is there, I'll repeat it for you. Right. Okay. So this is what we were talking about in the last lecture. This was the last scheduling algorithm which we were talking about. So what is the problem with this? Starvation, right? So the processes which are in the bottommost queue, they'll be waiting for the upper queues to become empty. What is the solution to this? Aging. How do we implement aging here? Any idea? So when I was having priority scheduling, there I could age processes. With time, I could increase their priority. Here, not every process has a priority here, right? So maybe this second queue, it is using. So this second queue over here, just give me a moment. Okay, maybe I'll just talk somehow. This is not working. So the second queue here, it might be using, let's say, a round robin scheduling policy. Third queue might be using a first come, first serve, right? So how do you increase the priority of the processes with time to implement aging in this case? What can you do? So see, it might be so possible that let's say Q1 and Q2, they are empty for a long period of time, and a process in Q3, it is waiting for a long time, right? So what we can do with time, we can shift it up to the previous queues, to Q2 or Q1. So that way we are increasing its priority with time. So this kind of scheduling, it's called multi-level queue scheduling, right? So it sort of employs all the goodness in all the previous scheduling policies. Okay. Much with scheduling policy, we'll talk about some other things today. So you might have seen a question like this. It's visible, so most of it. Can you answer it? I would have seen many questions like this in your childhood. So I'll repeat a question for you. If a person can build a wall in 10 days, then in how many days will 10 persons build this wall? One, right? Okay. So the question is easy. Any idea why I'm asking you this question? How many processes? How many processors can we use, right? So till now, whenever we talked about scheduling, we have talked about a computer having a single processor, right? So if I have multiple processors in my system, I can just speed up everything. And how will you do scheduling in such a case? We haven't addressed this question before. So let's say I have multiple processors, then how do I do scheduling? Is the question, right? So these two things, so the first one which we have studied till now, we call it concurrency. So what is concurrency? I have a single processor and somehow I have to speed up everything. I want things to be finished quickly. So we come up with a lot of scheduling policies. We have seen that our job here is to use a smarter scheduling policy so that we can increase the throughput, decrease the response time, decrease the waiting time, right? And we do a lot of things quickly. So concurrency, still only one process is executing at one time. So concurrency is giving us, but every process there is getting the illusion that it is the only one which is having the CPU. So in concurrency also, every process has an illusion that it's having a processor of its own, although that's not true. Parallelism is more like reality. So on our systems, we have 4 cores. So we can actually at a time actually do 4 things together. So how can we make use of parallelism, right? And how do we do scheduling in that case? So before understanding how we do scheduling in that case, let's address a few basic questions. So here is a question for you. So assume that you have a 4-core system, right? So your system can actually do 4 things at the same time. Now I have given you 2 matrices, each of size 10,000 cross 10,000. I want you to multiply both of these matrices and give me the output, right? And assume that for now there is no other process in your RAM, right? Assume that for now all your 4 processors sort of, they are empty, they are idle. So how will you do this? Okay, so we have an idea here. So what we can do is we break this one process into 4 processes, and then we can send each one to an individual processor. But how do I do that? How do I do that breaking part? So, hmm? Come again. Okay. So that is the algorithm. So my question here is, okay, so now let me put it like this. So let me make the situation more generic. So I have somehow divided this one task into 4 tasks, right? And what do you think the input that all of these, so I have 4 processes with me now, and I know that I'll run these 4 processes. They will give me some output, and I need to merge that output at the end, right? Okay, that is the first thing. I need to merge the output. The second thing here is, what is the input to all these 4 processes? Is it the same or is it different? It will be different, right? Or will it be same? Different, right? So first of all, will you then write a different process which will give different inputs to all these 4 processes? How will you do that? So how are you planning to take your input? So assume that all the cores are homogeneous. All of them are equally fast. Okay, so you assign a core to split the work, right? So that is the first process which is going to run, which is going to give input to all these different processes. They will execute. How do you take the output now? Where do you write the output? How do you make these processes communicate? Can you tell me the exact policy which you are going to use to show me the output? In RAM? Okay, so here is the idea. So one processor which finishes the job first, or one process rather which finishes the job first, waits for the others, and then maybe it can write the output to some shared RAM. I don't know how to do that. How do I have that shared RAM? So I'm coming there soon. Or you can write the output to a file maybe. That will make it slow, right? That is the first thing which comes to my mind. So if there are 4 processes, let's say not matrix multiplication, it can be any program, and they are working on the part of that program. All of them are computing different things. So to take the output together, one idea is you store the output in a file, right? But then you are accessing the hard disk, and then it will take time. What other ideas can we use? Okay, so we haven't discussed yet about cache. So let's not talk about cache as of now. Any idea? So let's say you are writing a very simple C program. What will you do? Let me generalize the situation rather. Let's forget about matrix multiplication for now. Let's say there are two processes running on your system and somehow they want to talk to each other. So let me put it like this. So let's say the problem is this here. So there are two processes which are running. One process is creating some data, maybe it's reading for the environment, and it want to pass this data to some other process. Write a function. Yes, so we should have some policy, some function, so that both of these can communicate. That's correct. So we call it a producer-consumer problem. So maybe there is a process which is with the help of certain sensors reading the temperature from the environment, and now it wants to send the value of temperature. It might not, it need not be a single value. It can be a very big block of data, and it might want to pass that data to some other process running on your system. So we haven't even talked about that till now. Till now, we have sort of assumed that scheduler can schedule any process at any time and they can run independently, but that's often not true. So the processes, they are not independent. Okay, so the answer which I was looking for, so let's say there are two C codes, right? And they want to share some data. How will you do that? So one idea is to use a file. Both of them can read some data from the same file. They can read the data back to some other file. Is there some other policy which you can use in C so that two programs they can share data? Something to do with the storage classes which you have studied. Can you tell me the storage classes? I expected this to be the first answer. So what all types of variables do you have in C? I'm not talking about data types, the other kind of variables you have in terms of storage classes. Extern, right? So what does extern do? So till now we know about local variables, global variables. There are some register variables. You can go back and look about that about them. But then we have this extern variable. Why do we use extern? I don't think we have used extern much in our codes till now. But you'll actually be using them when your processes they have to work on a shared data, right? So in this case, in the temperature example, so let's say I have two processes. One I call the producer, which is capturing the temperature, and another one is consumer, which is taking this temperature. So you can declare this variable temperature to be extern in one file, and then in second file you don't have to define it, you just declare it to be extern. It will search in the other files where it finds a variable called temperature, and this temperature will be shared. So in case your one C code makes a change to this extern variable, it will automatically be changed for your second code. That's how you can share it. Okay, how does this extern actually happen? On a memory level. So what happens on a memory level? So till now, when we talked about a process gets its address space, what all was the part of that address space? So there was a text part, which was the code. Then we had the data, which were the global variables. We had the stack for local variables and function calls. We had heap for dynamic memory allocation with malloc. So something which is declared extern, where does it go? Will it sit on stack? Will it sit on heap? Will it sit on data or elsewhere? Come again. Okay, maybe a different space. Let me rephrase my question. So there are these two processes, right, which are sitting in your main memory, and there is this variable which they are sharing. Both of these are sharing this variable. It's common to both of them. Where should you keep this variable? In P1's, let's say in consumer's address space, or in producer's address space, or in both of them? Come again? I didn't get you. Can you just remove? Some are using some other space in RAM. Okay, some other space in RAM, right? Not neither in the address space of consumer nor in the producer. That's what you are saying. Okay, so we have an answer. Maybe some other address space. We do not know what that address space is. Right? So the answer to this will become more clear when we'll talk about the third unit, which is memory management. So what actually happens is, I'll give you an intuition about it. So when you print the address of a particular variable in a C program, what is that address which you get? Right, so we say that it is the address of the variable. It tells me where the variable is stored in that physical memory. But well, actually it's not that. It's not the physical memory address of your variable. So what your operating system does is, it creates something which is called a virtual address space. So whenever you print the address of a particular variable, it gives you a virtual address. Now what is this virtual address? The OS, it wants to abstract everything from you. It doesn't even want you to know where exactly is your variable sitting in the main memory in the RAM. So what it will do, so I'll give you a, so assume that a particular process in actual in RAM, it is at the location 6789. Although these will be some hexadecimal numbers, just assume that it is 6789. So what operating system will do, when you ask for a particular address, it will map everything to a virtual address. So basically 6 will become 1, 7 will become 2, 8 will become 3, 9 will become 4. And now when you ask for an address to this program, it will show you the address from that 1 to 4. So where that particular variable is located, it gives you the virtual address space. Maybe some other process is running and it is located in the actual physical memory 101, 102, 103, 104. It also gets mapped to some virtual addresses 1, 2, 3, 4. Virtual addresses can be the same. Right, so you are actually printing variables from two different programs, but you might end up seeing that they both have the same address. So with that same address is the virtual address. So just to give you an intuition, what extern does, it does exactly the opposite thing. So this variable which you have declared as extern, it will be there on the virtual address space of both the processes. So it will sit in the data part of consumer as well as in the data part of producer. So let's say for consumer, it is at address 5. For producer, it is at address 15, but then both of those virtual addresses, they will be mapped to the same physical address space. So in your RAM, actually, there will be only one variable which is extern, but when it is mapped to the virtual address space, both the processes can access it. It will be there in the data part of both the processes. We will discuss about it more when we'll come to the memory management chapter. Okay, so till now, these are the two things which we can do to make processes communicate. One is use a file, but then that is very slow. So we say, okay, well, use an extern variable. What is the problem with using extern variable? I have to remove this. Security. Okay. Any other issue? Okay, security in what sense? That's right. So if somehow a user can actually look at this mapping from virtual to physical address space. So see, the whole point of operating system is why it gives every process a virtual address spaces, so that they do not know much about each other. Right? I should not know where exactly is the physical address space of some other process. And somehow when we implement extern, we are sort of overriding that. So that is one thing. Another thing is some problem just like a static memory allocation. So you need to know in advance how much data will you be sharing. So in the case of temperature, I know that it is one integer. In the case if it's a big memory block, how do you know? So if a process has to create some data on the fly and then share it with some other process, and you do not know in advance how much data it is going to share, what will you do in that case? So we have few things there, few things which we can work with. So here is the first example. So let's say it's a parent and child. Let's say it's a parent and child working together. right? So there is a parent process. So what I can probably do is consumer process, I make it the parent process. Then after some time it forks a child. So I have this, so producer is the parent, sorry, consumer is the child. And what we can do is, when this parent process, it starts executing, it creates a file. It creates a file pointer which is accessing a particular file, right? What then happens, and when this child process is created, as we know, the address space of the parent will be as it is copied to the child. So the child can also access that file pointer, and then they can communicate using the same file, right? And we have discussed this before. So there is no need that these two processes should be parent and child. They can be any other processes if you know what is the name of the common file, what should be the size and stuff. So there is a reason why I said that, why I took this example to be of a parent and child. Okay, come to the second case. So you would have used pipes, right, to pass data from one command to another or one process to another. What do pipes do? What are they? So you would have mostly used it when you're working with shell commands, so to pass the output of one shell command to another. So can someone tell me what is actually happening there? What does pipe do? So pipes are actually implemented by kernel. So in the first case, if you look at it, the problem only was the parent and child, they were working in the same file. The only issue was they had to access the hard disk every time, which made it slow. So pipe is actually a protocol which is offered to you by the operating system, where still parent and child, they can mostly act as if they are writing to the file. The only difference is that the shared space, it's not in the form of a file in your hard disk, it is in the random access memory. So both of them can very quickly access it and talk to each other. It is done with the help of file descriptors. You can look it up for further detail. What are file descriptors? We'll talk about them when we come to the file management chapter. But the problem with pipes here is you can only use them between parent and child. If you had files, you can use them between every process, right? This policy, you can use it only between the parent and child. And I expect a question from any of you at this point. I'm expecting a question here. It is one directional, yes, right? So yes, that's a very good point you brought up. So when you have these pipes, you can send data only from one process to another, right? So parent can send the data to child with the help of one pipe. If you want child also to send data back to the parent, you should have one more pipe. So you can achieve that bi-directional thing with two pipes. So I repeat my statement and then I'll expect the question again. So I'm saying that with the help of pipe, you can only pass data between the parent and the child. So when you are using these pipes in your shell, right, do you think that whenever we are using that pipe symbol, those two processes, they are parent and child always? Come again. It's okay. If you have a laptop, you can type in the chat window. I can see it here. Okay, okay, no issues, no issues. Okay, so what is happening in that particular case? So you have some processes which might not be parent and child, but then in those cases, if you look deeper into it, their parent will be the same. So actually with the help of pipes, you can also make siblings talk to each other, not just parent and child. So parent can have two children and then those children can talk to each other, but unrelated processes cannot talk to each other. Okay, there are some more approaches to shared memory. So pipe is not a shared memory approach. I'll come to this. This file sharing, you can say it's kind of not a shared memory, but it's a shared file. Extern is a shared memory approach, right? So you declare some variable which is shared. There are some more approaches to shared memory. So you can explore these functions in C. So the first one is mmap. You also use mmap again between a parent and a child. And what does it do? Its work is very similar to the extern, but what it actually maps the entire address space of the parent and child. So the idea is I have a parent, I do a fork, you get a child. right? And now their both address spaces are different. Parent has its own address space, child has its own address space. You can use this mmap function to merge both of these as one. So now both of these virtual address spaces of parent and child, previously they were pointing to two different physical address spaces. With the help of mmap, you can map them to the same physical address space, resulting them in sharing the memory together. Then there are these system calls which you can use: SHM get, SHM-AT, SHM-DT. Again, you can look further in this. So these SHM calls, you can use that between unrelated processes also. So they give you a way to implement shared memory between multiple processes. So overall, if you look at this entire thing of communication between the processes, people call it inter-process communication, but I don't know why to use the word inter, because there is nothing much like intra-process communication that anyhow we have it. So let's just call it process communication. So we have two ways for that. So the most of the approaches which we discussed till now, they were the shared memory approach, where two processes, they were using the same memory. And then the second one is called the message passing approach. There is not much difference between the two. They are actually exactly the same. The only difference is in the shared memory space. The space which they share, it is managed by the processes themselves. It is in the user space. In the case of message passing, it is also a shared memory approach only. Here also the processes, they are accessing the same memory. The only difference is this memory is in the kernel space. So processes cannot access it directly. They have to send a message to the kernel that yes, I want to write something to the shared space, or they might want some data from the shared space. So they basically talk to kernel with the help of certain messages. So we call it the message passing approach. Okay. So what problems can occur with shared memory approach if two processes they are using the same memory? Race conditions, right? There can be a lot of problems there. So look at this. So assume that I had these three C files and I had this extern variable which is y here, right? Assume that these file 1 and file 2, they are executing concurrently on your system, or even parallelly, let's say, if I have more processors. And then in file 1, I do a y++, in file 2, I do a y++. Right? So both the files have just one statement after this int y here, y++ here, and y++ here. Right? So what should be y after that? Assume that y was 0 before. 2, right? And what it will be? 1. How come 1? Right, so that sounds awkward. So there are two programs, y shared, one is doing y++, second is also doing y++. It's supposed to be 2 after both the y++. How come it can be 1? Both read 0, both add 1. Okay, assume that it's concurrent programming. I have only one processor. Can it still happen? So assume that both the processes, they cannot run at exactly the same time. It can still happen, right? It can still happen on a uniprocessor system. So it might occur to you that if we were running these two files on these two processes on two different processors, it might so happen that both these statements are getting executed at the same time and somehow it becomes one. Even for a uniprocessor system, it can happen in the same way. And the answer is, when you convert these processes into a machine level language, right? It's not just one statement. So when I say y++, it's not one statement. How many statements are these? So when I'm running these programs, I'm actually executing the ./a.out file for both of these processes, right? That ./a.out file doesn't know anything about a++. It would have something else, right? So this one instruction y++, which I see there, it will be at least 3 instructions. How do you do? Yes, so let's talk in assembly language. So your processes, they are being executed. Assume that in us, we are talking about assembly language, although they are being executed in the machine language. So in assembly language, how do you do a y plus plus? You load y, right? So you get this value of y from your process, you keep it in a CPU register, then you run some logic there which increments it by 1 in that register, and then you write it back. That is how you do it, right? So those 3 conditions, they can actually create a trouble here. How so? So I'll give you some time to think. Okay, both of them will read 0. So let's take it step by step. So let's say it's file 1 which is executing, right? So currently y is 0. So it reads 0. So I don't have this pencil is not working today. I can't use the board. So let's just imagine. So this 0, it comes in the CPU register. Okay, what next? It adds 1. So the content of the register became 1 now. What next? Okay, I moved it back. So this one, it comes, right? And if it comes back, it is updated in the shared memory space, right? So it became 1 in the shared memory space. Even for file2.c, now y is 1. Am I correct? Yes, so it's not necessary that second process will read it after the first process, right? So again, so let's say this first instruction gets executed for, so this file1.c, it loads a 0 into the CPU register. Let's say it also adds it and makes it 1 there, right? Let's say store is not yet done for process 1, right? So it hasn't come back to that shared address space. It was 1 in the CPU registers, and a context switch happens, right? If it's a uniprocessor system, assuming a context switch happens, and now file2 starts executing. Clear? So what file1 will do, it will store all that state of CPU register. So for file1.c, it is 1, but it's not yet stored in that shared space because I was unable to do the store operation. Now file2 starts executing. It looks at the value of y, it is 0, right? It takes it in the register, increments it by 1, it becomes 1 in its register, right? And it can, yes, it can store it back, right? It can store it back. So y became 1, and now I resume the execution of file1.c. For it also, it has done its own addition operation. For it also, the value was 1. It stores that value, that still remains 1. Don't worry if you didn't understand it. I'll explain it again when we come to race condition. So the idea which I was trying to convey to you, that these are the problems which can happen in the shared memory or shared variable thing. So if two processes, they try to uh, concurrently or concurrently access the shared memory space, it can result in certain problems, right? And what is the solution to that? The solution to that is this particular part of your code where you are accessing some shared variable. So in this case, that part of code was y plus plus, right? So when you are working with external variables, let's say even in a C program, so this part of code which is dealing with the shared memory space, your process should not do a context switch when it is inside that particular part. It should execute that part completely at once, and only then a context switch should happen. So that particular part, it is called the critical section of the process or the program. Okay. I'm having trouble listening to you. Sorry. So how do you write it to the, I didn't really get it. We could do that if, so I discussed it in the context of a single processor system, right? So it's still happening in a single processor system. Yes, if there are multiple processors. You can implement some of those protocols. Okay, that's one of the solutions to the race condition. Okay, so coming next. Okay, so let's now talk about this different idea. So assume that I'm running this program of Word on my system, right? So when I'm typing something on my word processor, so that is one thing which is happening, that I'm able to type. When I'm typing, I also see it doing a spell check. So there can be certain words which can be underlined by a red line. And then it's also running a grammar check. There can be certain words which have a red or green line whatsoever. How is that happening? So I'm working on a single process. I'm running a single process and there are three things happening together. I hope you got my point. No? Okay, I'll repeat it again. So I'm working on this Word application. That's one program, right? I double click on it. It becomes a process in the RAM and the CPU starts executing it. Now, when I'm working on this word processor, I'm typing something. And as I type, along with time, I also see certain red marks under some of my words. And then you also see certain green marks under some of your words. So there are few more things happening here. So if I think about, let's say, how Microsoft Word would have been coded, there would be a module or there would be some part of code there which would be responsible for bringing what the user types to the system. So taking that in the buffer and showing it howsoever that happens. There is a second part which is running the spell check. That is a different part of the code inside the Microsoft Word program. And then there is a part which is running this grammar check. That is a different code. And somehow all of these codes are running at the same time. Okay, let me remove this and let's discuss. Online people, you can type it in the chat window. Yes.
I'll make type it gets shared, the memory activity gets shared, and then these four processes running on that particular memory. Like basically all of them, the three processes running on the same data that you were.
Yes, so all the three processes, they are running on the same data, right? So first of all, are these three processes is the first question. So for me, so let's look at it deeply. So for three modules of one process, but when I talk about a process, right, when I'm executing a process, isn't it like a single flow of control which I say? So CPU will execute the first instruction, second instruction, third instruction, even if it's a module, right? Even if it's a module. So let's say first I call the function which is responsible for typing, it's typing, and then that's a different, two functions cannot run at the same time. If you realize it, I have a process, it has two functions. There is no mechanism we have discussed till now which allows two functions to run at the same time, right? So if I'm executing a process, it will go in a line by line. There can be some go to statements which take you to some other part of the process and then it starts executing from there, but really only one thing is happening at a time. But here when I talk about MS Word, there are three things happening. How? Okay, that is one idea. So maybe it's one process which is looping again and again. So there is something which is defined inside the process itself, which for some time allows you to type, then quickly goes and for some time does a spell check, and then quickly goes and for some time does a grammar check. That's an idea. Any other idea how is it happening? Okay, that is one idea. So the process is doing it very smartly somehow, executing some of its code, then executing some of its code which is responsible for some other part, then executing some of its code which is responsible for some other part. Writing such a writing such a program will become quite complicated, isn't it? No, time is not the constraint. The processor will do it quickly. I'm talking at the level of the programmer when he's writing this code for MS Word.
can give a for loop. What is grammar check? Class being used. So it does spell check, it does grammar check. Here the microsecond. Third one is it goes back and does again and again.
I agree to that. That's a good idea. Okay, any other idea? Let's say you are having multiple processors and you want to make use of that. Let me include some complexity in that solution. How do we do it in parallel? We want to do this in parallel. So the first idea which we have, the process itself, it has a for loop which allows you to type for some time, then quickly does a grammar check, then quickly does a spell check. And there is this for loop which runs these 3 modules or 3 functions, and it quickly does that. But then if I extend the number of cores in your program, this program, it will still remain what I would say. It will not be able to utilize the power of 4 cores. Very good. So that was the next idea which I had in mind. So use a fork, right? So it might be so that when I run a word processor, it starts running. And then we know as a process is running, we have studied about fork. It can spawn and it can create a new child process, and then it can dedicate these jobs to them. Right. So although when we create these child processes, they are an exact clone of the parent, but there are certain system calls with which you can replace them with whatever you want to do. Right. So I can have these child processes. That is one model which works here. Right. And according to what we have discussed till now, this seems the best solution here. So there is a parent process, and then there are these multiple child processes which are running, and definitely they can share data. Right, because so first of all, parent address space gets exactly copied to the child address space. But once here also you'll have to deal with some technical difficulties. So after some time, when their address spaces become different, now if parent is doing something in its address space, maybe I'm typing something, it's coming to the address space of parent, doesn't get reflected in the child's address space. Right? As soon as you do a fork, their address spaces become different, but then we can use the mmap function, right? And we can make their address spaces same. So something you do here also gets reflected there, right? So that's one idea which we can use. But what mostly happens on today's system is we use something which is called multi-threading. So I'll explain you what it is, and then it will make clear that why don't we use this particular model of making various child processes and then executing it, and rather we do something called as multi-threading. Have anyone implemented multi-threading in C or Python? Okay, I have one hand. Right, so most of you should learn to use multi-threading. So the reason being, today the computing cost, it has come very low. So today we have at least 4 cores in our system. Some systems has even 8 or 16 cores. If you do not learn how to write programs which can run various of their parts parallelly, you will not be using your machines to the fullest level. And especially when you'll be coding some AI or ML applications, you need to do that. You need to make your programs fast. Okay, so where was I? I was on multi-threading. So the idea here is when you talk about all these this inter-process communication here, we are having multiple processes and they are using some sort of technique to sort of talk to each other, give each other data. So it becomes very heavy loaded, and most of the time and we suffer from race conditions and stuff like that. So what happens in multi-threading, it actually enables you to implement a protocol where you have one process and there is some global data with this. Then you have certain small modules or certain other codes which are in this big process. You can make all those codes to run concurrently while ensuring that all of these codes which are running concurrently, they are running as processes, let's say for the moment, and all these processes, they are sharing the same data without using any of these protocols which we discussed till now. Inherently their address space is the same, inherently their data is the same, right? So just imagine it as a few processes which are running and somehow their address space is exactly the same, right? So that's why we call these as threads and not processes. So all the processes, they have their own address space, but if you have threads, they share the address space. I'll take it further in the next lecture, maybe tomorrow or day after. So few things which I want to cover tomorrow and day after is multi-threading, and then a few scheduling algorithms for multiprocessor systems and real-time systems. Whatever we finish till this week is going to be a part of your minor exams. Okay, I'll email you the exact syllabus. If you have any queries, you can discuss with me. Attendance, just write it on a sheet of paper, take a pic and upload it in the chat window.
The answer that you sent yesterday, for the warm boot, you said the answer is shut down, but in the documents it is very closely related to restarting.
Let me check. Give me a moment.